All praise, all glory, all honors most certainly due to the Most High, the God of the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And peace to you in the name of Jesus. This is your brother Elisha Israel of the household of faith, and I count it truly a blessing each and every time that I can come before you to preach the word of God. Never do I count it as a light thing to do so. All right, brothers and sisters, I want to deal with the second part of this lesson entitled Israel Come Out of Babylon. Again, the title is Israel Come Out of Babylon. But before I do, I just want to comment on two things that I saw that I found to be just odd. I'm just mentioning them just to show you the madness of people. Number one, I saw them both today. I don't know how I missed them. And sometimes you hear things, you're like, that's not true, right? So I'm looking at some. I hear somebody mention the NBA players during Christmas season, because I don't watch football at all. Okay, just how they did. They handled the whole Kaepernick situation. I don't watch football at all. I'm talking about NFL football. I don't watch that, and I really don't watch sports. Period. But I would catch a game every now and again. You know, catch a basketball game every now and again. Especially I like basketball more. I haven't watched a game all season, so I'm looking. I hear somebody mention it, and then I say, you know, they say that the NBA players were sitting on Santa Claus's lap asking for things, asking for gifts. I said these grown men are sitting on this white man's lap asking for gifts. But sure enough, I saw it with my own eyes. Why would you sit? You're a grown man. Why would you be sitting on that white man's or any man's lap? Period. You're a grown man. But again, you think about those commercials, those insurance commercials where they got the most masculine, the strongest players, physical specimens, so to speak. He in a dress. One of them a baby, the other one an old man, and he in a dress. You know, the strongest one in a dress. So each and every way they try to effeminize black males, escalate them totally. Now, how you sitting on his lap? You probably can bench press this man with one hand, and yet you sitting on his lap. Men got to stop being soft and being stupid. Don't be nobody's punk out here. Also, just on a whole different note, I don't know if anybody saw the child of the former president, the name of Chelsea Clinton, sent a tweet to the wishing, talking about another holiday, wishing some people at the churches, Satan, some Luciferians, Happy New Year. Now I heard this, I was like, that's not true. You know, you hear all these, you know, especially everything's politicized, right? You know, they'll make up something, you know. Kane got kids, but secret black children, you know, they make up all kind of stuff. That's false, right? I'm just giving an example of just the false lies that they'll put forth, you know, for political purposes. But I looked at it, and then of course somebody jumped on it and said she was affiliated. I think it was a Republican politician or somebody jumped on it and said, you know, she's affiliated, or now she's a Luciferian and all this stuff. Of course, they're using it for political means. But I said, okay. But I don't believe she actually would tweet them. But sure enough, she tweeted them and said, hey, look, you know, we can respect each other. It just shows you the madness. Why in the world, not to mention New Year's Day is just some folly, but why would you be tweeting Happy New Year to some Luciferians? And she said, well, I'm a Methodist. And she said her husband is Jewish. You know, that's not accurate. Well, he's not really he's a so-called Jew, right? It's just a madness in the world. People are lost in the sauce everywhere you turn, and it really stems from just people being spiritually blind. This world is dark, and it relates to this lesson I'm going to get into right now. Again, come out of Babylon, because he's telling Israel to come out of Babylon, because that spiritual system that started in Babylon. It's being perpetuated even today. I've mentioned it last time I came before you through Roman Catholicism. Okay. And I just want to read. I want to read something. This is from Austin Henry Laird's Nineveh and Its Remains, Volume 2, page 440. It says, we have the united testimony of sacred and profane history. Okay, so sacred history would be that history that's found in the religious or spiritual books like the scriptures. So it says, we have the united testimony of sacred and profane history that idolatry originated in the area of Babylonia, the most ancient of religious systems. I'm going to read that again. This is Laird's Nineveh and Its Remains, Volume 2, page 440. Say, we have the united testimony of sacred and profane history that idolatry originated in the area of Babylonia, the most ancient of religious systems. Now, I talked about this on Wednesday, how Abraham was called out of Babylonia, southern Babylonia, Ur of the Chaldees. Excuse me. And I also read this one. I'm going to read this one again. This is from Faith of Our Fathers, page 106, 1917 edition by Cardinal James Gibbons. It says, the penetration of the religion of Babylon. So now idolatry started in Babylon, right? You know, the Bible mentions Babel. Or Babel, right? And Babylon, quite often, it says the penetration of the religion, the spiritual system of Babylon became so general and well known that Rome was called the New Babylon. So when you read in Revelation 17, mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth, that's talking about Rome that sits on 7 hills. Okay, but let's go to I want to read some things and how Israel got wrapped up into this thing. Let's look at the history of this thing. Let's go to Nehemiah. Let's go to Nehemiah. We're going to pick it up at chapter 9. And we'll pick it up at verse 6. Nehemiah chapter 9 and verse 6. So now here's this confession. And then this is during a time where Israel is allowed, with Judah in particular, and you have Levites and Benjamin scattered in here, they are allowed to go back into the land, all right? Through the decrees of Cyrus and Artaxerxes, okay? So it says in Nehemiah 9 and 6, it says, even thou art Lord alone. Thou hast made heaven, the heaven of heavens, with all their hosts, the earth, and all things that are therein, the seas and all that is therein. And thou preservest them all, and the host of heaven worshipeth thee. See, that's the one thing we need to understand, that there is a God. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is the true and living God. See, you have to leave all this idolatry alone. That's why we so messed up right now as a people, because of our false worship. We serving, as he said, you're going to go into captivity, serving gods of wood and stone. That's why you got Negroes right now sitting on Santa Claus, grown Negroes. I'm talking men 25, 30 years old sitting on Santa's lap. So it says, you made all things. It says, thou art the Lord, the God who didst choose Abram or Abraham. It says, and broughtest him forth out of Ur the Chaldees and gavest him the name of Abraham. It means of a great multitude. Again, he called him out of that place, which was the hub of false worship. He called him out of that place. Let's go to, and let's see what he did for his seed. Okay, because we know they went into Egypt, they dwelt there, they cried out to God through the affliction. He brought them out. And then he manifested himself unto these people, right? He showed them their power, his power. And then he gave them something. He said, thou camest down also, verse 13, thou camest down also upon Mount Sinai and spakest with them from heaven. See, you got God speaking to them. And then it says, and gavest them right judgments and true laws, good statutes and commandments. See, brothers and sisters, we must get back to what God gave our people. The law, the Torah, which is instruction, a guide to living. This is what the true living God, this is what the Creator gave us. And it said, and made us known unto them thy holy Sabbath. and commanded them precepts, statutes, and laws by the hand of Moses, thy servant. See, this is what he gave us. He didn't give us this falsehood that we acquired from these other nations, even back then, and what we are taking from other nations, even until this day. Let's go to Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 7. Deuteronomy 7, because he told us, even before we go into the land, he said, be sanctified. Don't deal with these other nations. Deuteronomy 7:1 says, when the Lord thy God shall bring thee into the land, whither thou goest to possess it, and have cast out many nations before thee, the Hittites and the Girgashites and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and mightier than thou. When the Lord thy God shall deliver them before thee, thou shalt smite them and utterly destroy them. Thou shalt make no covenant with them, nor show mercy unto them. He said, neither shalt thou make marriages with them. Thy daughter thou shalt not give unto his son, nor his daughter shalt thou take unto thy son. Why? He says, for they will turn away thy son from following me, that they may serve other gods. So will the anger of the Lord be kindled against you and destroy thee suddenly. You have to leave the gods of these nations alone. You have to leave these people alone. Because if you get intermingled into these people, you'll start worshiping their gods. Right? He said, because that's why I told him to destroy those altars. But this is exactly what Israel began to do. Okay, let's go to the book of Judges. Well, actually, Joshua, I read this. But in Joshua chapter 24, he charges the people, right? They're coming into the land, they're coming into their nationhood totally, and he tells them, now therefore, in verse 14, now therefore fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in truth, and put away the gods which your father served on the other side of the flood. On the other side, the flood is talking about the Euphrates. When your fathers, Terah and them, Nichor and Abraham, they were in Babylon, they were worshiping false gods. That's what they were doing. So it even tells you that in verse 2. It says, your fathers dwelt on the other side of the flood in old time, even Terah, the father of Abraham and the father of Nichor, and they served other gods. That's what they were doing in Babylon. We just read that Babylon was where idolatry began. Okay? But what did the Most High do? What did God do? He called Abraham out of that place or hub of false worship. So it says in verse 15, and if it seem evil unto you to serve the Lord, choose you this day whom ye will serve. Whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the flood, Haman in Babylon, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land ye dwell, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. But understand, Israel quickly went astray. This is Judges chapter 2, and we're going to pick it up at verse 8. It says, and Joshua the son of Nun, this is Judges 2 and 8, and Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died, being 110 years old. Yes, 110 years old. So now, Moses was leading the people. Moses in there, they died. Then Joshua died. Okay, I'm going to skip down a little bit. Let's find out what they started to do. In verse 10, because he's buried. It talks about his burial in verse 9. Then it says in verse 10, and also all their generation were gathered unto their fathers, and there arose another generation after them, which knew not the Lord, nor yet the works which he had done for Israel. It only takes one generation to mess everything up. I'll give you an example. You can have money in your family from generation to generation to generations from something one of your ancestors did. And it takes one fool to come and mess everything up. Just one. Mess all the money up. Now his children are born in squalor because he was an idiot. Okay? He spent his money on drugs and women and foolishness. So it says in verse 11, because they didn't know the works, they weren't connected to that, so to speak. They knew not the Lord, nor yet the works which he had done for Israel. They had heard about it. See, we made these generations down the line. We read about it, but there were some people that actually saw it with their own eyes. But this testimony is sure. But verse 11, it said, and the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and it says, and served Baalim, or Baal, or Baal. Okay? And they forsook the Lord God of their fathers, which brought them out of the land of Egypt, followed other gods of the gods of the people that were round about them. And what did it bring it? It brought them chaos. It brought them turmoil, destruction. It was a continuous cycle when you read in Judges. Israel would sin against God. The Lord would bring judgment. Then they would cry out to God. The judgment would be the other nations or the other people surrounding them, oppressing them. They would cry out to God. He would save them. They go right back into this sin. But then it says, so they followed other gods, the gods of the people that were round about them, and bowed themselves unto them and provoked the Lord to anger. Then it says, and they forsook the Lord and served Baal or Baal and Ashtoreth. And of course, the anger of the Lord was hot against them. And this didn't end there. We know that Israel was continually engaged in false worship. Let's go. So they were serving Baal, they were serving Ashtoreth. We're going to find eventually where that leads to. Remember, I said, come out of Babylon. But before we read that, let's go to 1 Kings, the 11th chapter. And we read about the wisest king, the wealthiest king, but he came up short in this regard. This is Solomon in 1 Kings chapter 11 and verse 3. I'm going to read it verse 1. It says, but King Solomon loved many strange women, together with the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Zidonians, and Hittites. And some of these names should sound familiar. Not every single one, but some of them sound familiar because we read about them in Deuteronomy 7. We read some of those same names, which he said, have no dealings with this people. Be a sanctified people, right? Deal with your own people. And we need to do that even unto this day. See, we as a nation, our men and our women are at total war with one another. All assault, total war. That's another lesson. But we are straight up war with one another. Women taking men to court, cheating child support. Men talking crazy about black women talking crazy about black men. We had odds with one another, but we the same people that came on the hulls of the ship, at the bottom of the ship's chain came over across that water. We the same ones that was working in that field. We was the same ones getting bit by dogs and beat up in the marches. And now we can't seem to get it together. It's because, quite frankly, number one, we have let some other people get in our bed. I'm going to deal with that at a different time. But let me get back to this. So it says in verse 2 of the nations concerning which the Lord said unto the children of Israel, ye shall not go into them, neither shall they come in unto you, for surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. Again, we read that in Deuteronomy 7. It says, Solomon clave unto these in love. That was his mistake. See, and what he did, he really had a harem. Because really, the Bible, when you read about the kings, also in Deuteronomy, I believe it's the 17th chapter, where it said, don't multiply wives unto yourself. And you got to think, is that saying he can't have more than one wife? No. You know that's not the case. Yeah, that's in Deuteronomy 17, starting in verse 14. And if you read it in verse 17, he talks about that specifically. When you ask for a king, what he should do. When you have, because he even told David, hey, I would have gave you more wives. Why'd you go after Uriah's wife? See, it wasn't about him having more than one wife. Israel was a polygynous society. It was a patriarchy as well. Okay? People are trying to say, they're trying to, because we've been Europeanized and Westernized in our minds, we think that polygyny is somehow now a sin. It's not a sin. It never has been a sin. Never has been a sin. But he wrote in the Torah, in the instruction, you see that a king was not supposed to multiply wives. This is what he did. It says, and he had, in verse 3, and he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines. He had a harem. That's multiplying wives. It says, and his wives turned away his heart, and he took wives from these other people. He did exactly the opposite of what was to be done. And this is what it says. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Zidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. And Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord, and went not fully after the Lord, as did David his father. Okay? It says, then did Solomon, he even went further, start building high places. Then did Solomon build an high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, in the hill that is before Jerusalem, and for Molech, the abomination of the children of Ammon. See, remember, they were passing their children through the fire, sacrificing their children to Molech, the god Molech. But it says in verse 8, and likewise did he for all his strange wives. Strange just means foreign wives, which burnt incense and sacrificed unto their gods. See, that was an error. But let's see something here. Let's go to and read about some of these gods and see where this worship came from that Israel is now involved in. This is from the entry under Ashtoreth. And this is from the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia, 1915. It says, the name Ashtoreth and cult of the goddess were derived from Babylonia, or that's Babylon. Again, that is the hub of false worship, idolatry. So it says the name Ashtoreth, the cult of the goddess, were derived from Babylonia, where Ishtar represented the evening and morning stars. In Babylonia and Assyria, Ishtar was the goddess of love and war. Some would say that's even where you get the name Easter from. An old Babylonian legend related how the descent of Ishtar entered Hades in search of her dead husband. The other goddesses of Babylonia, who were little more than reflections of the god, tended to merge into Ishtar, who thus became a type of female divinity, a personification of the productive principle in nature. See, this is all about the cycles of nature. When you're dealing, a lot of times we deal in this idolatry, when you're dealing in this paganism, it's used to explain things that are going on in nature. But you take, in doing so, you made false gods. And now you've taken the true and living God out of the picture, because the true and living God didn't set up that type of worship. He gave you laws on how to worship. It says, a personification of the productive principle in nature, and more especially the mother and creatress of mankind. Now listen to this. The chief seat of the worship in Ishtar in Babylonia was Erech. Now that should sound familiar. If we go back to Genesis, give me 1 second, pages sticking together. If we go back to Genesis, the 10th chapter, talking about Nimrod. In Genesis 10 and verse 9, it says, he was a mighty hunter before the Lord, wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh, in the land of Shinar. Now, it says here, the chief seat of the worship of Ishtar in Babylonia, again, where idolatry started, was Erech, where prostitution was practiced in her name, and she was served with immoral rites by bands of men and women. So what is it talking about? People are dealing in the sensuous sexual behavior and honor, even sacred, they call it sacred prostitution, but it's really profane. It's really an abomination. They're dealing in that type of prostitution in honor of this false god. This is from The Dying God, the book, The Dying God, The Hidden History of Western Civilization by David Livingstone, page 51. It said the worship of Baal, we read about him, or Murdoch, seems to have been derived from the cult of Tammuz, revered in Babylonia and Syria. See, we keep going back to Babylon. Known as the shepherd, Tammuz's marriage to the goddess Ishtar was dramatically reenacted. Listen to this. During February through March, right? When springtime and everything came back to life, so to speak, right? From the dead winter, it says where the king actually took on the identity of the god, and by copulating with the priestess incarnated the goddess. He was thought to fertilize all of nature for the year. This is what these people were dealing with. But it's some foolishness. It's some foolishness. Let's go back to the scriptures. Let's go to Jeremiah. Because they're dealing in Baal and Ishtar, and you even hear Tammuz. See, Israel got involved in all that type of worship. And that's why that's why Jeremiah, they call the weeping prophet, had this judgment against them from God that they didn't want to hear because of their false worship. See, the prophets were coming to the people because they were engaged in this false worship. This is Jeremiah, the 7th chapter, and we're going to pick it up at verse 14. Jeremiah 7 and verse 14. Because we're gonna read about a couple of them. We're gonna read about Tammuz and this queen of heaven. This is Jeremiah 7 and verse 14. It says, therefore will I do unto this house which is called by my name, wherein ye trust, and unto the place which I gave to you and to your fathers, as I have done to Shiloh. So destruction is coming. He says, and I will cast you out of my sight, as I have cast out all your brethren, even the whole seed of Ephraim. So you read about that. What did he do? They went into captivity with the Assyrians. That's talking about the northern kingdom. Therefore, pray not thou for this people, neither lift up cry nor prayer for them, neither make intercession to me, for I will not hear thee. I will not hear thee. Don't pray for these people. I won't hear it. Seest thou not what they do in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem? He said, don't you know what they're doing? Let me tell you. The children gather wood, and the fathers kindle the fire, and the women knead their dough to make cakes to the queen of heaven, and to pour drink offerings unto other gods, that they may provoke me to anger. See, when it comes to his church, or the congregation of the people, it's just like he's like a man that would be jealous of his wife. He don't want some other man with his wife. So it is with the Most High. He does not want he doesn't want his bride with another. He even said another, some false gods. You commit adultery. He even says, I am married unto you. So it says in verse 19, do they provoke me to do they provoke me to anger, saith the Lord? Do they not provoke themselves to the confusion of their own faces? Therefore, thus saith the Lord God, behold, my anger, my fury shall be poured out upon this place, upon man, upon beast, and upon the trees in the field, and upon the fruit of the ground, and it shall burn and shall not be quenched. Why? Because of false worship. Let's go to let's see. Let's go to, I think I will go to Ezekiel. Let's go to the book of Ezekiel, chapter 8. Because here another mighty prophet who was sent to the people to tell them about their wickedness is shown what they're doing. This is Ezekiel 8, and I'm going to pick it up at verse 5. Ezekiel 8 and verse 5. It reads, 8 and 5. Then said he unto me, son of man, lift up thine eyes now the way toward the north. So I lifted up mine eyes the way toward the north, and behold, northward at the gate of the altar, this image of jealousy in the entry. So now this is in the temple. These people have defiled the temple, that same temple that David prepared for and Solomon built. It's defiled. He said furthermore unto me, son of man, seest thou what they do, even the great abominations that the house of Israel committed here, that I should go far off from my sanctuary. But turn thee yet again, and thou shalt see greater abominations. So now he's going to show you all the things they were doing, this false worship. He says in verse 14 or verse 13, because they're doing all kind of wickedness. Then he said also unto me, turn thee yet again, and thou shalt see greater abominations that they do. Then he brought me to the door of the gate of the Lord's house, which was toward the north. And behold, there sat women weeping for Tammuz. Now we just read about Tammuz, right? And we'll read again about them. But where you trace all this back again to Babylon. And other nations, other cultures took this pattern, if you will, and attributed it, just gave it other names, personified different attributes that were taking place in nature, but it's all the same worship, but it originated in Babylon. So they said there were people that they were looking towards the north, and they were sat women weeping for Tammuz. It says in verse 16, and he brought me into the inner court of the Lord's house. And behold, at the door of the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, were about 25 men with their backs toward the temple of the Lord. Now they got their back to the temple, and what are they doing? It said, and their faces toward the east, and they worshipped the sun toward the east. I want to read, and I know I've read this before. I can find that book. Hold on one second. Ah, here it is. Because again, it's about what's going on in nature. So I just wanted to read this. When it's talking about the sun, it says, this is again, Secret Teaching of All Ages by Manly P. Hall. Now it says in Albert Pike's Morals and Dogmas, to them, the aboriginal peoples, he, the sun, was the innate fire of bodies, the fire of nature, author of life, heat, and ignition. He was to them the efficient cause of all generation. For without him, there was no movement, no existence, no form. He was to them immense, indivisible, imperishable, and everywhere present. Again, it's talking about the sun. It was their need of light and of its creative energy that was felt by all men, and nothing was more fearful to them than his absence. His beneficent influences caused his indication with the principle of good. He talks about in different places, the Brahma of the Hindus, Mithras of the Persians, Atham, Amun, and Putha, and Osiris of the Egyptians, and Baal of the Chaldeans. Okay? Baal of the Chaldeans. And they even say we didn't read. Now this is, again, I'm not saying this. These occult. This is occultist, by the way. This is occultist. Manly P. Hall was talking about Luciferian earlier. Yeah, he was wicked. But and I'm not just saying that. I mean, he had that reputation. If you read about Manly P. Hall, but he says listen to this. He says, among the nations of antiquity, altars, mounds, and temples were dedicated to the worship of the orb of day, about the sun. The ruins of these sacred places yet remain, notable among them being the pyramids of Yucatan in Egypt, the snake mounds of the American Indians, the ziggurats of Babylon and Chaldea, the round towers of Ireland, and the massive rings of uncut stone in Britain and Normandy. I believe in Stonehenge is, similar. That's the least of all those structures, by the way. But then it says the Tower of Babel, which according to the scriptures was built so that man might reach up to God. This is his view. It says was probably an astronomical observatory. Let's go to another reference. Let's go to one second. This is from the Zion Pictorial Bible Dictionary under the Queen of Heaven. Now this is on page 701. It says some controversy surrounds the philology and significance of this title, talking about Queen of Heaven. But it seems best to regard it as the female deity to whom with their families aid and connivance, Hebrew women made offerings. So that's in Jeremiah 7. We didn't read it, but it's also in Jeremiah 44. It says the most likely identification, again, you hear his name, is with Ashtoreth. Now we read about where Ashtoreth came from, Babylon. It said, God, so Ashtar, a goddess of love and fertility, synonymous with the Assyrian and Babylonian Ishtar. See it again, same goddesses, Diana, Ishtar, Ashtoreth, Astarte, these are all the same. It says, and the Roman Venus. It said the wailing for Tammuz was associated with her cult. We read that in Ezekiel 8. Its ritual was the license and obscenity characteristic of the Eastern fertility cults. So they're dealing again in that licentious sexual behavior. Ever a temptation to the Hebrews and the chief objective of the prophet's attack on paganism. See, that's what the prophets are come telling them what thus say the Lord. They beat the prophets, threatened to kill them and put them in prison. Now listen to this. This is what Pope Pius the 11th. This is from the Ad Celea Regnum, when he actually declared Mary as the Queen of Heaven. See, understand, brothers and sisters, they are perpetuating that Babylonian system. Let me just, in case you missed it, I just want to read this real quick in Revelation 17, where it says, Revelation 17 and verse 4, it says, and the woman, because this woman had a golden cup and a handful of abominations, right? Fornication is spiritual doctrine that she's made the earth, the inhabitants to drink of it. Okay. And then it says in verse 5, and upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. But then it says in verse 9, and here is the mind which hath wisdom, the 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. Now these 7 mountains, the 7 hills, is referring to Rome. Okay. This is the one that's indoctrinated the whole world with the Christianity. Today's Christianity is false. You can't find what people talk about they're Christian in the Bible. I'm talking about their practices. You can't find that mess in the Bible. They're doing it's paganism. And if you tear back the veneer, you go right, you see Rome. Okay. So now this is from this is what Pope Pius the 11th or the 12th, excuse me, declared Mary the Queen of Heaven. Because they venerate Mary, but why are they doing that? Because the Bible doesn't venerate her. It says she's blessed and highly favored, but they say she's a perpetual virgin. They say you got to go to her to intercede on your to the Father, all kind of foolishness. It says, because while bearing toward us a truly motherly affection, and having in her care the work of our salvation. This is what this heathen say. I call him a heathen. I talk about him. There's gonna come a time when he gonna mean your life, but I'll talk about him. She is so solicitous about the whole human race. Listen, Mary is not in heaven doing anything. No man had to send it up to heaven. Mary's in the grave. But these heathens, this is straight wickedness. Catholicism is wickedness, straight up. Pulling no punches. It's straight wickedness. You peel back the veneer, it's Luciferian. We were talking about Luciferianism earlier. It's straight up of Satan. So it says, and since she has been appointed by God to be the queen of heaven and earth. Who was God that appointed her? See, this is something that Roman Catholics say, the audacity of them. And it's exalted above all the choirs of angels and saints, and even stands at the right hand of her only begotten Son, Jesus Christ our Lord. Show me that Bible verse. But again, they tell you they don't need that. They do what they want. Like they did with Sunday. They said it's not biblical. You got some backwood preacher, some uneducated preacher talking about trying to read you a Bible verse, trying to substantiate Sunday worship, and the Catholics will tell you, no, we changed that. What you doing? That's why he said, come on back to mama. You know, they the mother church. They said, if you really believe in sola scriptura, of you only the scriptures, you wouldn't be observing Sunday worship, weekly Sunday worship. You'd be dealing with the Sabbath. And they don't pull any punches about that. They make no qualms about saying that we changed. You can't read that in the Bible that Sunday is the day of worship. So it says, and is exalted above all the choirs and angels and saints, and even stands at the right hand of her only begotten Son, Jesus Christ our Lord. She presents our petitions in a most efficacious manner. What she asks, she obtains. Her pleas can never be unheard. This is wickedness, because the intercessor is the Messiah. He is the high priest. It don't tell you, the Bible does not tell you that Mary is interceding on your behalf. That's a lie. They're a bunch of liars. Bunch of liars. It's sad. I just want to read some in Hebrews. Hebrews 7 and verse 23. It says, they were many priests, because they were not suffered to continue by reason of death. That's talking about the high priest through Aaron's lineage. But this man, referring to Messiah, because he continueth ever, hath an unchangeable priesthood. Wherefore he is able also to save them to the uttermost that come unto God by him, seeing he ever liveth to make intercession for us. See, he is making intercession. You cannot read that Mary making intercession for you. This is Hebrews 9 and verse 24. It said, for Christ is not entered into the holy place made with hands, which are the figures of the true. That's what they went. They went to the tabernacle. They went to the temple, the high priest. They would go before the most holy place and on the Day of Atonement and make intercession. They had the blood of animals, but the Most High, the Messiah, he shed his own blood and went before the throne of the Father. It says in verse 24, for Christ is not entered into the holy places made with hands, which are the figures of the truth, but in heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us, making intercession. That's what he's doing. That's what he's doing. But you got these lying hypocrites talking about Mary doing something. But what do they call her? They call her the Queen of Heaven. Let's read something about Tammuz. Okay, this is from under Tammuz, page 827, and found in the Pictorial Bible Dictionary. It says Tammuz, because it's all taking you back to Babylon and that type of worship, and it's representing what is going on in nature. It says in Tammuz, under Tammuz, it says a fertility god widely worshipped in Mesopotamia. Okay, that's in Iraq. That was what Babylon was. Syria and Palestine, equivalent to Osiris in Egypt and Adonis of the Greeks. Again, they have different names, same concept. His consort was the goddess Ishtar, Astarte, or Ashtura. That should sound familiar. Their cult involved the sensuous rites. Over and over again, it's telling you that they're dealing in this illicit behavior. Tammuz was supposed to have been killed by a wild boar while shepherding his flocks. His wife rescued him from the underworld. His death was taken to represent the onset of winter. His rebirth was what the winter solstice was about. That's what you get. That's the rebirth of Tammuz. Some says the death of Nimrod, the rebirth of Tammuz. The story changes a little bit. You even have the Egyptian tale, or the idea, so to speak, you know, when you're dealing with the obelisk and all that. But ultimately, it's the same concept. So what happens? He gets killed by a wild boar. That represents the onset of winter. He comes back to life, or is rescued from the underworld, resurrected when? During the time of the winter solstice. That's the rebirth of the sun. You understand? And then what do people, if you really start connecting these things, what takes place on Easter? Usually, traditionally, people have, that's why they had, during that, they eat Easter ham. That's why it's representing that boar and the slaughtering of that killing of that boar. Okay, but let's go to. Let's see where else we want to go. Let's go to Revelation, the 18th chapter. Revelation, the 18th chapter, because again, all this is related to these days. That we can relate this stuff mainly back to some of the major days in Christendom. When you talking about Christmas and Easter, even Lent. Matter of fact, I said they were weeping for Tammuz. Let me read you something under Lent. Because you got to think, why were they weeping for Tammuz? Lent is that time right before Easter, right? Well, let's see what they used to do for Tammuz. Let's see. Well, actually, let me read. I want to read two references, okay? I want to read one from that's continually talking about what I was talking about as far as the connection with these days. This is from a book entitled The Encircled Serpent, A Study of Serpent Symbolism in All Countries and Ages, page 93, by Oldfield Howie. It says, perhaps it is not generally realized our Christmas tree and Yule log are connected with the healing serpent, Asclepius. It will be curious to trace this out. The Christmas festival of the sun god on the 25th of December was celebrated by many ancient peoples as the Natalis Invicti Solis, the birthday of the unconquered sun. For the time of the winter solstice, when the days began to lengthen, was regarded as a fitting symbol of the god's reincarnation, or birth for the purpose of subduing his enemies. The incarnated God was known by different names in different countries and periods. We may find him as Nimrod, as Tammuz or Adonis, and as Bacchus. And everywhere his birth was celebrated with feasting and revelry. The word Yule is the Chaldee term for an infant or a little child. It's no coincidence that when you see, oftentimes in Catholicism, you will see the images of so it's supposed to be Mary and Jesus, but that's not Mary and Jesus. That's that Queen of Heaven and the little child. Notice that oftentimes he's depicted as a child. See, that's not talking about see, it's a lot of esoteric things going on. Like you have to peel back the surface. It's symbolism. You look at cathedrals throughout the world. I have hundreds of pages, books with hundreds of pages with pictures. Made these books with pictures and hundreds of pages of all the symbolism that you find throughout Catholic edifices and buildings. But nevertheless, and it's real, you wouldn't know it unless you knew what you were looking for. It's like right in plain sight. Like when I'll give you an example. Like you look at a dollar. You ever looked at the American dollar? You see all this stuff on the American dollar? You don't pay no attention. You pay, you buy your Flaming Hots or whatever you paying for with a dollar, right? Give me $1.25 on pump 3. Have you ever looked at the dollar? You ever looked at the all-seeing eye? Ever seen that? The New World Order on that? The owl in the corner? You got all kind of stuff on that dollar. But you won't know. It's in your face, but you wouldn't know it. Unless you knew something about the occult. So it says, the word Yule is the Chaldee term for an infant or little child, and Christmas Day was known among these people as Yule Day or the Child's Day, whilst Christmas Eve was called by them Mother Night. Understand, it had nothing to do with the Messiah. He wasn't born on December 25th. Right? Somebody didn't tell these Negroes sitting on Santa's lap that. But now this is about Lent. I was talking about Tammuz. This is under Lent because that comes right before Easter. It says Lent. And we read that the women were weeping for Tammuz, right? Israelite women were weeping for Tammuz. Where we get Tammuz from? Again, Babylon. But it says a 40-day abstinence period was anciently observed in honor of the pagan gods Osiris, Adonis, and Tammuz. Okay, that's under Sabian. That's by John Lancier's Sabian Researchers, page 111 and 112. And understand, that's not, even though you had people fasting, like you had Elijah, you had Moses, you had Jesus, or the Messiah that fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, that's not Lent. That's not Lent. And this is from John Cassian's A Select Library of Nicene and Post-Nicene Fathers of the Christian Church. Volume 11, this is from 1894. He says, it ought to be known that the observance of Lent did not exist as long as the primitive church retained its perfection unbroken. See, they weren't dealing with that. They weren't dealing with that. Now let's go to Revelation, the 18th chapter. Revelation, the 18th chapter. Because Israel really has to come out of this. And the Bible tells you that's what's going to take place. But I just want to read this here. This will be the last place. Revelation 18 and verse 1. It says, and after these things, I saw another angel come down from heaven having great power. And the earth was lightened with his glory. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon, the great is fallen, and is become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. So this is figuratively speaking here, but it's the destruction of this one that is continuing the perpetuation of this false system. It says, for all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. See, that's what's taking place. The merchants have been made rich. The kings have committed fornication. All the people have been led astray. In verse 4, it says, and I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people. Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her plagues. Why? It says, for her sins have reached unto heaven, and God hath remembered her iniquities. See? So it's time for judgment at that moment. And Israel, his people, he says, come out of that false worship. Come out of that false worship. We are surrounded by that false worship, and we need to come out of it, just like Abraham, our patriarch, our forefather, came out of it, and we need to deal with what thus saith the Lord. And that's Israel come out of Babylon part 2. And brothers and sisters, it is always my prayer that you will edify. Just want to remind you that we're at the Household of Faith, meet every Sabbath at Indiana University Northwest Library Conference Center, room LC 105, 3400 Broadway, Gary, Indiana. We have a few more weeks before we're in our new place. It's coming along. And we're grateful to God for blessing us to have a place, a permanent place to worship. It fits us well. It's a beautiful thing. It's work, but it's a beautiful thing. And I want to remind you also just to pray for one another, strengthen one another. And again, it's always my prayer that you will edify through the preaching of his word.